Right. So today we're going to really get into artisan bread and pizza.
Yeah.
Using flour, water, salt, yeast by Ken Forkish.
Right.
And this is really for you guys out there
Absolutely.
who want to know these concepts.
Yeah.
Like really quickly and really clearly.
Exactly.
So we're going to lay it all out for you.
Yeah.
Ken Forkish, of course, is
He's the owner of
Ken's Artisan Bakery.
Ken's Artisan Bakery and Ken's Artisan Pizza.
Pizza in Portland.
Right, in Portland, Oregon.
Oregon, and he
has a really cool background.
yeah, he had like a whole corporate career.
Yeah.
And
almost 20 years, I think.
Yeah, like almost 20 years in the corporate world, and then just like took a hard left turn.
Yeah, and then I was like,
I'm going to
be a baker.
Be a baker.
I want to bake.
Yeah.
And not only did he just decide to bake,
he did not mess around.
He went and trained in the U.S. and France.
Both in the U.S. and in France.
With real deal.
Yeah.
Like artisan bakers.
He went all in.
Yeah, he went all in.
Yeah.
So this book is really a culmination of like all that experience, all that knowledge.
Distilled into this book.
That is...
which is awesome, by the way.
Oh, it's so good.
I think we can both agree on that.
Yeah, it's great.
So what we're going to do in this deep dive is really give you the core principles and methods of artisan baking.
Yes.
The way that Ken Forkish lays it out.
And make it really clear for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to do it in a way...
hopefully fun.
That's fun.
And easy to understand.
That's easy to grasp.
Yeah.
And applicable.
Yeah.
Whether you are brand new to this.
You've been baking for a while.
Or you've been baking for a while.
Yeah.
This is for everyone.
Exactly.
So,
the book itself is written.
It's written for a really wide audience.
Yeah. For kind of like...
Yeah, so like...
the whole gamut.
Of the total novice.
Yeah. To people who, maybe they've been baking for a while, but they're looking for like a different approach.
Yeah, like a different approach.
Maybe they want to get into levain breads and they're a little intimidated by it, So it's really...
So it's meant to be.
It's meant to be...
accessible.
Accessible no matter where you are in your baking journey.
Exactly.
And one of the things
one thing that I really love about it is that he's really a proponent of hand mixing the dough.
He really is.
Like he really wants you to...
Yeah, he doesn't want you to just throw it in a stand mixer.
To use your hands.
He wants you to like get in there and feel it.
Yeah, feel it.
Yeah.
You get a feel for
That's how you really get to know the dough.
Yeah, I kind of...
You really understand like how it's developing when you're using your hands.
Yeah, so if you're like intimidated...
like I was.
By the idea of getting your hands dirty...
Yeah, totally.
Like... this is the...
He makes it very approachable.
Yeah, he's not gonna.
Yeah.
He makes it very approachable.
Yeah.
So
where do you even begin with something like this? Like what are
where do we begin? Like what are the fundamentals?
What are the fundamental things that you need to really wrap your head around?
Yeah.
I think a really good place to start is flavor development.
Okay.
Because one of the things that Forkish really emphasizes is that time and temperature, they're not just like conditions you bake under. They're actually like ingredients.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like they're actively contributing to the flavor.
So they're not just like a setting on the oven.
Yeah, exactly.
They're actually like
they're an actual part of the recipe.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So how does that actually work? Like how?
So basically the longer you let your dough ferment, the more complex and nuanced the flavor is going to be.
So less yeast, more time equals more flavor.
Yeah. Generally speaking, that's kind of the guiding principle of the whole book.
Okay.
So
it's not just
the yeast that you add that's responsible for the taste.
Okay.
Like flour naturally contains all these wild yeasts and bacterial spores.
Okay.
And they all produce...
So they're already in there.
Yeah, they're already in there.
Okay.
So the longer you let it ferment, the more they kind of do their thing.
Okay.
And they produce all these byproducts like acids and alcohols and esters.
Okay.
And those things are what contribute to that really like intricate flavor.
Okay, so that's where that like sourdough tang comes from.
Exactly.
That long fermentation process.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but there's a balance.
Yeah, you can't just let it go forever.
Right, you can't just let it ferment indefinitely.
Right.
Because over fermentation can actually lead to like off flavors.
Okay.
Like you might end up with bread that tastes excessively alcoholic or acidic, which kind of masks the inherent sweetness of the wheat.
Okay.
And also, if you ferment it for too long, the gluten structure, which is what gives bread its shape and texture, can actually start to break down.
So it's all about finding the right balance.
It's all about finding that sweet spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so less yeast, more time.
Yep.
in general?
In moderation.
Yeah.
In moderation.
And more flavor.
Yes.
Okay.
No, when it comes to artisan bread,
okay.
And, really baking in general, precision is really important.
Yeah.
So Forkish is a huge proponent of measuring everything by weight.
I was going to say.
Using a digital scale.
He loves his scale.
He loves his scale.
Like he's kind of like,
yeah,
if you don't want to use a scale, then you're not serious about baking.
If the idea of using a scale is like too much of a hassle for you, then maybe baking's not for you.
He's kind of like that about it.
Yeah, he's kind of like
He doesn't say it in those words.
Well, he's like, if you think a scale is a hassle, then you should get one.
Yeah, he's pretty blunt about it.
Yeah, he's pretty blunt about it. But he makes a really good point.
He's not wrong.
No, he's not wrong at all.
So what's the benefit to the home baker?
So when you measure by volume, like using cups and tablespoons and stuff,
yeah,
it's just inherently imprecise.
Okay.
Especially with flour.
Yeah.
How you scoop it, how densely it's packed, it can really affect how much you're actually using.
Okay.
So when you weigh things, it's much more accurate and reliable.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is where bakers' percentages come in.
Yes.
This is like a whole new language for people.
A whole language, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the language of professional bakers.
Yeah.
So basically, it's a way of expressing the quantity of each ingredient as a percentage of the total weight of the flour.
Okay.
So the flour is always considered 100%.
Okay.
And then everything else is calculated based on that. So Forkish gives you kind of a base formula.
Okay.
100% flour. Around 68% water.
Okay.
2% salt.
Okay.
And 2% fresh yeast.
Gotcha.
And he gives you the equivalent for instant yeast as well.
So everything is basically calculated based on the amount of flour you're using.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's like a ratio.
Yeah, it's a ratio.
Okay. And this is where you hear people talk about hydration, which is basically the percentage of water
relative to the
flour.
Okay.
So if you have a recipe that's 70% hydration, that's going to be a pretty wet dough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And I noticed that all the recipes are based on 1,000 grams of flour.
Right.
Is there a reason for that?
Yeah. So in the French baking tradition, it's pretty common to use 1 kilogram or 1,000 grams of flour as like the base for your recipes.
Okay.
And it just makes the calculations really straightforward. And then it's also easier for you to scale the recipes up or down.
Okay.
If you want to.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So he does give you volume measurements.
Yeah, he does give you volume measurements.
But he's very clear.
He's very clear that they're not as reliable. Yeah. Especially when you start working with pre-ferments.
Okay.
So he provides them as a starting point. Yeah. But he really encourages you to get a scale.
To get a scale.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now
That's good advice.
It is good advice.
Now one of the techniques that I really love is the Autolyse.
The Autolyse, yeah.
So what is that and how does it benefit the baker?
So Autolyse is this really simple but powerful technique where you basically mix just the flour and water. Okay. And then you let it rest for like 20 to 30 minutes before you add anything else.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So no yeast, no
yeast. So no salt, no nothing.
Just flour and water.
Just flour and water.
And you just let it sit there.
Yeah, you just let it sit there.
Okay.
So what happens during that time?
Yeah, what's happened?
Is the flour is fully absorbing the water.
Okay.
So it's getting completely hydrated. And that's important because it helps to develop the gluten structure more effectively. Okay. And it also activates enzymes in the flour, like amylase, which starts breaking down starches into sugars.
Gotcha. So basically...
So it's getting a head start.
It's getting a head start.
Yeah.
And then when you add the other ingredients, you're going to have a dough that's smoother.
Okay.
More extensible.
More extensible.
Which means it's easier to stretch without tearing.
Gotcha.
And it's going to lead to better texture in your final bread.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why do you
hold off on the salt?
No. Why no salt?
So salt actually...
That's bad.
Well, no, salt's not bad.
Okay.
Salt's good, but during this phase, it can inhibit the absorption of the water.
So you want the flour to be fully saturated first. Okay. And then you add the salt.
Gotcha.
So it's all about timing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're giving it that head start.
You're giving it a head start.
Then you come in with the rest of your ingredients.
Exactly.
And then he's really big on mixing by hand.
Right.
So what is the benefit to mixing by hand?
Well, so he believes that mixing by hand allows you to really connect with the dough.
Okay.
You can feel the texture. You can feel how it's developing.
You get that feedback.
Yeah, you get that feedback.
Yeah.
And he has specific techniques that he describes.
Okay.
Like the Pincer method.
The Pincer.
Yeah. Have you heard of that?
I have.
Yeah.
I have.
It's kind of a gentle way of incorporating ingredients, especially in wet doughs, where you're basically like...
Yeah, it's like picking it up and
kind of like...
Almost like folding it over on itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a way of mixing without overworking the dough.
Okay.
And he says that this less intensive mixing actually helps the gluten to organize itself in a more natural way.
Okay.
Which is especially beneficial for high hydration doughs.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
He also mentions that the target final dough temperature is usually between 75 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit for optimal yeast activity and gluten development.
Okay, so he wants you to keep an eye on that temperature.
Yeah, you don't want it to get too hot.
Okay.
You don't want it to get too cold.
Too cold.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we've mixed it.
We've mixed it. We've let it autolyze.
Autolyze. Now we're going to fold.
Now we're going to fold.
So what's the purpose of folding?
So folding is basically a way of developing the gluten structure in a less aggressive way than kneading.
Okay.
You know.
Especially for these wet doughs.
Especially for wet doughs.
Yeah.
And it also helps to redistribute the yeast and the byproducts of fermentation throughout the dough.
Okay.
And perhaps most importantly, it helps to trap the gases that are produced during fermentation, which contributes to the strength of the dough and the development of those air pockets.
Which we want.
Which we want.
Yeah.
You want that beautiful crumb.
We want those air pockets.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so when do you fold?
When should we fold?
So Forkish usually recommends doing the first fold.
Okay.
Pretty early in the bulk fermentation, like maybe 10 to 15 minutes.
After you've mixed it.
After you've mixed it.
Okay. It's had some time to rest.
It's had some time to rest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then subsequent folds are done after the dough has had a chance to relax and expand.
From the previous fold.
From the previous fold.
Okay.
So the number of folds you need to do really depends on how wet your dough is.
Okay.
Wetter doughs require more folds.
More folds.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the book gives you specific guidance on like the timing and number of folds.
For each recipe.
For each recipe.
So you'll tell you exactly when to fold.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So now we fold.
We've
got our...
Now we're ready for bulk fermentation.
Bulk fermentation.
Which is a really important part of the process.
Yeah. So what do we need to know about bulk fermentation?
So Forkish actually points out that in many of his recipes, he lets the dough expand beyond just doubled in size.
Oh, wow.
Which is what a lot of recipes tell you to do.
Yeah, just wait till it's doubled.
Yeah.
Okay.
He sometimes lets it double and a half or even triple.
Wow. Okay.
Especially with wetter doughs because they produce more gas.
Okay.
And he emphasizes that a complete bulk fermentation is essential for maximum flavor development.
Okay.
Because it gives those yeast and bacteria enough time
to do their thing.
Okay. Yeah.
And he also mentions that a slower rise
during bulk fermentation.
Yeah.
Which you can achieve.
Which you can achieve by
using cooler temperatures.
Using cooler temperatures or less yeast.
Okay.
Yeah, will enhance the flavor even more.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
that's really interesting.
It's all about like maximizing that flavor.
Yeah.
You know?
So now we've bulk fermented.
We've bulk fermented.
Now we're moving on to shaping and proofing.
Shaping and proofing.
Okay.
So what is proofing?
Okay, so proofing is the final rise of your shaped dough before it goes in the oven.
Okay.
And it's a really important stage.
Okay.
Because this is where the loaves are developing their final volume.
Okay.
And Forkish really stresses that the goal here is for the loaves to reach their optimal point of inflation.
Okay.
You know, where they've produced enough gas to be light and airy, but they haven't gone so far that the gluten structure starts to weaken and break down.
Okay. So it's like
it's a fine line.
Fine line
between underproofing and overproofing.
Yeah. So what happens if you underproof or overproof?
So if you underproof, you're going to end up with bread that's dense, maybe a little tight crumb.
No.
But if you overproof, your loaves are going to deflate.
In the oven.
Yeah. And you're not going to get that nice oven spring.
So it's all about finding that.
It's all about finding that sweet spot.
Sweet spot.
Again.
Yeah. Okay. And then.
And he mentions that you can actually slow down the proofing process quite significantly by putting your loaves in the refrigerator.
Okay.
Which can be really helpful.
And you can proof in the fridge?
Yeah, you can proof in the fridge.
Okay.
For a long time even.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then finally, the bake.
The bake.
The moment we've all been waiting for.
The moment of truth.
What are some of the key things we need to know?
So Forkish really stresses proper oven temperature, often starting very high, like 500 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
Especially when you're baking in a Dutch oven.
Okay.
Which he recommends for a lot of his bread recipes.
Okay, so Dutch oven is key.
Dutch oven is key.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why the Dutch oven?
So the Dutch oven creates this enclosed environment that traps steam.
Okay.
And that steam is what helps to create a really thin and crispy crust.
We want that steam.
We want that steam.
Yeah.
And then after a certain amount of time, you take the lid off.
To let it brown.
To let it brown.
Yeah. Okay, and then the baking time.
The baking time varies.
Varies.
Depending on the size and type of bread.
Yeah.
But he does caution against...
Underbaking.
Underbaking, yeah.
Okay.
You want to make sure it's fully cooked through?
Yeah. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
And talk about some of the ways he approaches leavening.
Right.
So we've got...
Pre-ferments.
Pre-ferments.
Yeah.
What is a pre-ferment?
So a pre-ferment is basically a portion of your dough that you mix up in advance, like anywhere from 6 to 12 hours before you make your final dough.
Okay.
And they're usually made with just flour, water, and a tiny bit of yeast.
Okay.
And the main reasons to use them.
Yeah, why would you use a pre-ferment?
They enhance the flavor of the bread.
Okay.
They improve its leavening power.
Okay.
And they can actually extend its shelf life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because of the acidity that develops during the fermentation.
So what are some of the different...
Yeah, what are some of the types?
Yeah, what are the types of pre-ferments?
So the two main types that Forkish focuses on are Poolish.
Poolish? Biga.
Yeah.
Okay,
so what's the difference?
What's the difference?
So Poolish is wetter.
Okay.
Usually equal parts flour and water.
Okay.
And it uses just a tiny bit of commercial yeast.
Okay.
And it's typically fermented for 6 to 12 hours. And it gives the bread like a subtle, almost buttery, slightly nutty flavor.
Okay.
Biga, on the other hand, has less water.
Okay.
So it's stiffer.
Stiffer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Usually around like 60 to 70% hydration.
Okay.
And it's also made with flour, water, and a little bit of yeast.
Okay.
Fermented for a similar amount of time.
Okay.
And it tends to produce more complex and sometimes tannier flavors.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he uses a lot of Biga.
He uses a lot of Biga.
In his recipes.
Yeah. Especially...
There are a lot that are like 80% Biga.
Yeah. 80% Biga is like a signature.
Yeah, that's a lot of Biga.
It is a lot of Biga.
So what's the impact of using that much?
So when you use that much Biga, it really intensifies the flavors that develop during the fermentation.
Okay.
And it also contributes to a more open and airy crumb structure.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a way of like...
So it's a way of really getting the most out of that Biga.
Getting the most out of that Biga.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about Leaven.
Leaven or Sourdough Starter. The king of pre-ferments.
The king, yeah. So what is Leaven?
So Leaven is basically a culture of wild yeast and bacteria that occur naturally in flour and the environment.
Okay. So it's different than commercial yeast.
It is very different from commercial yeast.
Okay.
Yeah. So commercial yeast is a monoculture, which means it's just one strain of yeast.
Okay.
Whereas Leaven is a whole community of different yeasts and bacteria.
Okay.
So it's much more complex.
More complex, and that leads to a more complex flavor.
Exactly. And Leaven fermentation is typically much slower than fermentation with commercial yeast.
Okay.
And that longer fermentation is what really allows those complex flavors to develop.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what are those flavors like? What are we talking about?
So you get that characteristic tang from sourdough bread, which comes from the bacteria, producing lactic acid and acetic acid.
Okay.
And those acids also help to create a heartier crust.
Okay.
And they can extend the shelf life of the bread.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And he has like a whole section in the book.
He does.
About how to make your own.
How to make your own Leaven from scratch.
Which seems like a...
It's a commitment.
Commitment.
Yeah.
But he makes it.
But he breaks it down.
Easy to follow.
Easy to follow, yeah. So it takes about 5 days.
5 days.
Yeah, and it's basically...
Flour and water.
Flour and water.
Every day.
Every day you feed it.
You feed it?
Yeah.
Okay, and so over time...
Over time...
Like, how does it change?
It starts out looking kind of like a dough or a batter.
Okay.
And then it gets increasingly bubbly and gassy.
Okay.
And it develops this really, like, fragrant, sometimes pungent, like, acidic aroma.
Okay, so there are a lot of factors.
There are a lot of factors that can affect the flavor.
Yeah, that can affect how that Leaven tastes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what are those factors?
So the hydration level, which is the ratio of water to flour. That plays a role. A common range is like 60 to 100% hydration. The temperature, warmer temperatures favor lactic.